Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Synapse Influencers Ask the Experts session with Bob and Chuck.
Because the experts couldn't come, so you got us.
I'm Tyler. I'm part of the Synapse Influencers lead team, and I have swag to give away. That's the reason I'm here. I can't leave with any of that because it was really hard to bring up from the garage, so I'm not taking any away. So the goal is for you to all get some. If you haven't yet joined the Synapse Influencers program, please, this is us, please join at aka.ms/Synapse Influencers. It's free to join. You get cool stuff. You get invited to our sessions like this, and you get to participate with the whole community. We have 800 plus members, which is crazy. We thought we'd have just a few, but it's really exploded. So with that, we'll take your questions. Does anybody have any questions about anything they've heard here, but preferably about Synapse, but it's okay, you can ask anything, because these two are really the experts.
And we're good at making things up if we don't know. We got.
Thank you for doing that. So a quick question, you guys announced the link to SQL on Synapse, so with SQL 2022. Now, I know this is only going to, I know this is only going to the dedicated, you can only have it in dedicated Synapse. Is there any plans to have it not only for dedicated, but any other ones?
Yeah.
Chuck, good one. Chuck, I think it's a good one for you.
Yeah, this is one of the most common questions I get. Is can we go to a lake house? Can we go to something else? Someone actually asked me this morning if there was a monetary reason why we're pushing people in. It's a technical reason why we're going to the dedicated pools. If you look at Synapse Link for Cosmos DB, Synapse Link for Dataverse, those are, especially Cosmos DB, you're looking at a very write intense, append intense workload. You can do updates, you can do deletes, but your primary workload is going to be append. And for that, you can go into something like a Parquet format very, very easily. When you're dealing with a transactional source system where you have a good mix of updates, deletes, inserts, since in a Parquet file, if you want to delete something, you can't delete. You have to rewrite the file. Performance-wise, it's going to fall over from trying to keep up standpoint. The dedicated pools give us a relational engine to go into, so we can still handle it through a good relational engine. That's a big part of why we're in the dedicated pools. It's not, I'm trying to run up bills for people. No, there is a technical reason we are in the dedicated pools. But to answer your first question, yes, we are looking at what is next. What can we do, to get into more of a data lake format. I don't have a roadmap that I can share yet, but it is it's on our mind.
Because everybody's asking this question.
Everyone is asking this question.
Which I understand.
I'm getting this question more than I get the question that I thought I was going to get, which I won't prime anyone with. I want to see if it comes up.
Oh, you're teasing the audience, are you? Okay. There you go. Next question.
Who's next?
Chuck, I have a question for you if nobody has a question.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, okay.
How about that game on Sunday?
Wait, we're not going to talk about football today.
I live in Wisconsin.
Yeah. There you go. I brought him along. No, seriously, folks that are interested in this technology on the SQL Server side, Chuck, have asked me a lot about the impact to SQL Server workloads. So you're setting up a synchronization of a SQL Server to Synapse. It's near real-time analytics. It all sounds beautiful. But what is the impact on maybe my transactional workload in SQL Server?
Good question, good question. One of the core tenets of Synapse Link for SQL was minimal impact on the source system. If you think about a traditional ETL process, you're running queries against your source database. You're trying to extract that, and you've heard all of this already this morning. The exact same thing. You're extracting the data out of that system, whether you're using CDC tables or using a watermark and running the queries. You're adding load in a traditional ETL system to the system. So what we've done with Synapse Link is we built a new change feed processor into the SQL engine. This is in SQL 2022 and Azure SQL Database. It's built by the same team that built our replication technology and our CDC technology. It's new, it's not CDC, it's not replication, but we are going directly after the transaction log and scraping those transactions out. And then we're using a buffered ingestion zone, I'll call it. So if anyone's are familiar with IoT scenarios, your device is never right into the back-end system. You always have this buffered ingestion zone. In IoT, it's going to be Kafka or Event Hubs. We use ADLS Gen 2 storage accounts. So the SQL server is pushing its data into an ADLS Gen 2 storage account. Once it's there, we can mark that transaction in the transaction log so we can purge it, we can just get rid of it. We aren't holding on to that and keeping the log space open. And then there's an ingestion service on the back end that you can control how many cores you assign to that grabs that data and puts it into the dedicated pool. So yeah, we are minimizing impact on the source system by really just building this into the engine.
And these are committed transactions?
Yes,
right,
committed transactions.
Right, and you have a question?
Here you go.
I wanted to give you a microphone.
Can this work on views, not people?
That's another thing that we've heard. The question was, can this work with a view? That's another request we've had. Specifically, we've had the request for materialized views, because since we are really EL of the ETL process, we aren't doing transforms, we're extracting and loading your data. People have asked us for, could I build a materialized view to do some of that transaction logic and then have you move that? It's another thing that we are considering, and we are trying to figure out where we want to do that on the roadmap. I'm seeing your cheering section has a question.
I'm going to bring over the...
Yeah, I'm actually embarrassed. So as far as when you're running in hybrid, what latency is added when you're running on-prem SQL? That's kind of what I'm curious about.
So for the latency for publishing to Synapse Link, that's really gonna depend on where your storage account is. So with Azure SQL DB, with Azure SQL DB, when the storage account is managed by Synapse, so it's in the same region that your Synapse account is in. With SQL Server, you can put the storage account in any Azure region. So ideally, you want it to be in the same region as your Synapse account. That's for sure. You don't want to have that, because then you're adding additional latency. But yeah, it's really going to depend on your pipe to that storage account. Are you going over the public internet? Are you going over an express route with dedicated bandwidth? But yeah, some of the tricks there are keep it as close to your physical location as you can. And then, yeah, if you have an express route or some dedicated pipe that you can go over, take advantage of that. Or run in an Azure VM in that data center, and then you've got our backbone to do it.
I mean, think in terms of you had to copy Parquet, CSV, these kind of type files on a consistent basis to Azure storage. That's your latency. That's what we're doing in the engine. Got a bunch now.
So over a period of years, so Microsoft has now a bunch of technology that reads the log, right? Transaction logs, application logs, log shipping is popular. Is this going to be another thread that's going to do, or if you already have select transaction replication set up in my source, are you going to tag on that, or is it just going to be
This is new. This is new, and yeah, we are. So everything that's reading, that's taking advantage of the log, is also holding a lock on that log record until it is done. So yeah, we are one more thing that is holding a lock on that log record until it is committed to that storage account.
Now, Chuck, is there a limitation? So if I have transactional replication enabled, I still can use this, I believe. Is that right?
With transactional replication, we support on the subscriber, not the publisher or the distributor. Yeah.
Because then it would be the conflict.
Right. Yeah, you can enable on the subscriber. Yeah.
CDC, I'm trying to remember, that's one I'm not sure about.
I do not believe we can be concurrent with CDC.
Yeah, because that would be a problem in a conflict. So you'll need to pick and choose kind of what your change speed you want to use in this case. There was a bunch of questions here. Oh, okay, I got to remember all this. I'm going to go here.
It's a quick ignorant question. Can you tell me just one or two things that I should go to Synapse for instructional kit?
How much time you got?
Just two things.
Wait, maybe I should let the marketing guy handle that one. That's not a technical.
I didn't hear that.
Synapse, one of the beautiful things about Synapse is we are, fully integrated. We have our Synapse workspace in your Azure environment. We are integrated with SQL Server. We are sister teams. We work together. The engine behind Synapse, the core relational engine, is the SQL relational engine. So improvements that we make to Synapse get brought into SQL Server. We can make improvements on the SQL Server side and bring them into Synapse. We are working together off the same, that is probably your biggest thing, is all the innovations that we're doing on both sides help each other.
What is the basic difference between Azure Edge and Azure Arc? I've been hearing this term, but I'm confused, to be honest.
Sure. Like Azure SQL Edge and Azure Arc, is that what you meant?
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, I'll answer that question. So we talk about this SQL Edge to Cloud being a technology of SQL Server running across everywhere. Azure SQL Edge is container-based and a very small footprint designed to run actually directly on an IoT device. Think about running SQL Server on a drone. We've instrumented the container to be that small. It includes things like Kafka and streaming and machine learning. So that's what Azure SQL Edge is all about. Now it's got its base subscription model that you pay for. It's pretty inexpensive actually, but that's where you use Azure SQL Edge for, and even ARM devices. Azure Arc, I totally realize why it's confusing, and I'll explain it to you. Because we talked about in the keynote, Azure Arc enabled SQL Server is the ability to take an existing SQL Server and connect that to Azure for Azure Active Directory, pay-as-you-go licensing, purview policies, Microsoft Defender. Azure Arc SQL Managed Instance, we have to shorten the name, Chuck, that's killing me. That is taking SQL containers and running it on Kubernetes to give you a platform as a service in your infrastructure. It's also connected to Azure as well because it has a cloud billing model. So, an existing SQL Server on Windows or Linux, that's Azure Arc enabled SQL Server, and Azure Arc Managed Instance, kind of like a managed instance in your infrastructure or in your cloud. Those are the two main differences between the two. I think right here, this next question. Then we'll go on.
So what you just said about the buffer ingestion zone just made me wonder, if it's clear to release the transaction log, when it goes there, if something happens and that gets cleared, the server crashes or the memory gets flushed or whatever, so, is there any kind of visibility into making sure that stays in sync or that you had data loss there?
So the beautiful thing about it is we're leveraging the availability of our storage accounts, which are highly available, highly resilient, and we don't release the log record until it's been hardened. It's very much like log shipping. When you're shipping or always on, asynchronous always on, you still or synchronous always. Synchronous always on. You still have to harden the log record on the other side before we can move forward. Same thing here. We have to have that hardened on the other side before we release it. So that's one thing. We're relying on the high availability of our storage infrastructure, which is, we have high resiliency, high availability. There's multiple copies of that once it's been hardened. There's multiple copies in that region. And you can choose for SQL Server 2022, you could choose to do redundant storage. You could have local redundant, you can change your redundancy level on that storage. So that is one way we're doing that. Worst case scenario here is you re-replicate that table because we are just making a copy. We can restart that replication on just that table if there is a problem with it. So that is your absolute worst case scenario. And we are tied into Azure Monitor. We are tied into, you can check the availability and uptime of your storage account and that. So under normal operating circumstances, unless you have a storage outage, you likely are not going to have a problem. Now, if you have a storage outage, now we have an issue that you have to watch out for log full and that type of thing. That's where my real worry would be is, because with SQL 2022, since you manage the storage account, if you don't rotate your SAS token that you provide and it expires, then we aren't going to be able to export, and it's going to keep those records in your log, and you're going to end up with a full log. That, I think, that is my primary concern on using that buffered zone.
But Chuck, to be clear, we have watermarks, so we know in the log where we were, like replication. So if the SQL server restarts, we're good. Because we can go where we need to go in the log to know we didn't actually send it yet and put that in the landing zone.
Yeah. And if the storage account is gone, again, we know where we were, so when the storage account comes back or when you rotate that SAS token, we just keep moving forward from there.
Tyler, I'll let you pick them.
Yes.
Yeah, so do we have anything like cloud permission template in Azure?
For deploying Synapse Link for SQL?
Yeah.
Not yet. It is on my backlog. My personal backlog of work items is to do a DevOps sample and put out to GitHub. I'm hoping to have that out by the end of the year.
Okay, and any Flex server for Flex for SQL Server? Azure Flex server? Do we have anything? No, just like we have it for Postgres.
Oh, that's you. Flexible server.
Flexible server, yeah.
We did flexible. That's more of an Azure question. You might not even have this
for
one.
For SQL Server itself,
yeah.
On premises, that's up to you. But for Azure SQL Database, we have serverless.
Okay.
So if you want to go to that type of technology you've seen for Postgres flexible server, you would look at Azure SQL Database, where we have serverless and hyperscale technology.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a ton of questions.
There's a bunch, so I'm going to let you figure it out. We'll try to. We still have 40 minutes.
It's a follow-up question. Do you need
Can you put the mic right where you're?
Well, I'm saying that there's a special, how do you call it, a follow-up to the Azure Arc question that
Yes,
asked.
go ahead.
Do you need a special license or permit to be able to connect to your on-prem?
For Azure Arc enabled SQL Server, you don't. In fact, when you register a SQL Server as an Azure Arc enabled SQL Server, you pay no money. Only you pay subscription costs when you start using the services. So for example, if you connect Azure Arc SQL Server and you want to do Azure Active Directory, you would then start incurring subscription costs for that. But just by registering your server, you don't pay anything.
So what if, let's say you do like, say, evaluation or something like that, on your system?
So Azure Arc enabled SQL Server, again, it could be on any edition of SQL Server, it doesn't matter. It could be evaluation, enterprise standard, developer, whatever you want. So just by setting up that link itself, just doing that, there's no charge. It's only when you start consuming services. Synapse Link, for example, when you're setting up Synapse Link for SQL Server, you're already paying for a Synapse workspace in a dedicated pool because that's the only way you can get it going. Right?
Yeah.
So in that scenario, you're already set up now to go get that time. But for Azure Arc enabled SQL Server, again, just setting up and registering and see it in the portal doesn't cost anything.
I know Neil's got a question. We've been avoiding Neil.
Hi, Neil.
That's a good strategy to avoid me, by the way. A good call on that. So we're using change feeds, very similar to what we do like in Cosmos DB. We're going to obviously go to dedicated SQL pools. Is that the only option right now? Will we be able to send that feed data elsewhere to other resources?
I already answered this question. I'm not. We love you, Neil. We are in discussions about what other things besides the dedicated pool, how can we do that in the future? As I mentioned, there are some technical reasons why we use dedicated pool. As far as the change feed goes, we designed the change feed in such a way that it can be used by other things in the future that we might choose to develop. So yeah, keep watching, and if there are specific things that you would like to use that change feed for, let us know, because we are constantly designing. This is it's an Azure feature as well as a SQL Server feature, so we can build things in Azure SQL DB that will eventually make it back into the SQL Server product.
Yeah, this question is to Bob. So I asked this question this morning about the RDS and the license as you go payment.
The pay-as-you-go licensing.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, the breakfast session.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
did we not answer that for you?
Well, you did, but
Okay.
now as a follow-up question,
Okay.
you just mentioned about the SQL ARC.
Yes.
So if I'm using AWS like services, I'm supposed to have the Azure subscription as well for me just to leverage just the
For pay-as-you-go?
Yeah.
So today, at least our intention is, pay-as-you-go is an Azure option. So wherever you install SQL Server in Amazon EC2, when it's available, when you install it in Azure VM, sorry, not Azure VM, you install it in your on-premises environment, wherever it is, that is an Azure-only option. So you go into SQL Server, you say, I want to use pay-as-you-go, and you need the Azure Arc enablement to make it work. You would pick pay-as-you-go, and then now you're taking your Azure subscription and paying for your SQL license. That's our intention.
Okay.
So again, it wouldn't be an RDS play, it would be an EC2 play. Unless at some point we work with Amazon to make that work with RDS. So if you're running, again, SQL Server itself's got to run in a virtual machine and a multi-cloud or on premises, because of course if you're running an Azure virtual machine, you already have a pay-as-you-go option, right? So yeah, that would be the way it would work. I know a bunch of people raised your hand earlier. Please give us another shot. I'm sorry, do you have a question? Can you use the microphone, please?
How do you handle language?
For which part? Synapse Link?
What was it? What was the question?
How do you handle encryption?
Encryption. Ah, good question on encryption. So, depending on where you're coming from. So we are always communicating with encrypted channels. So, you know, anything that we send up to the cloud from on-prem, we are going over encrypted channels. That is table stakes for Microsoft. That I wouldn't have gotten past a security review on this if we weren't doing that. So that's how we do that. When it comes to the storage accounts, the landing zone storage accounts, if we are using SQL 2022 where it's bring your own storage account, you control the encryption on that storage account. You can do it with our keys or with your customer managed keys. If you are using Azure SQL, where it's the managed storage account that's part of the Synapse environment, that is encrypted using the same keys that you use to encrypt the Synapse environment. So if your Synapse environment is encrypted with service managed keys, the storage account will be encrypted with service managed keys. If Synapse is encrypted with customer managed keys, the landing zone storage account that Synapse creates will be encrypted with that same key.
Yeah, so we need to use the mic, ma'am, because we can't hear you.
So you keep the certificate on your
You can do it either way. If you bring your own key, you store the key in Key Vault and we use it. If you say service managed, that is, we take care of it all.
Either way.
So I think I have a two-part question. So I'm currently just using Azure Data Factory and we're pushing it to Snowflake, and I'm trying to implement Synapse. Is there going to be like a two steps of like a benefit? So like, okay, I've added Synapse, but I'm still using Snowflake to pull data into Power BI, and then I'm trying to migrate fully over to Azure and cut out Snowflake. So that, I guess, will I get all the benefit at the beginning, or will it be like, okay, you finish your migration, everything in Azure, now Synapse is giving you more analytics and information there?
Are we talking, okay, I have to define the term benefit. Are we talking about from a sales perspective or from a technical perspective?
Technical.
Okay, so the beautiful thing is, as you start moving your data, once data is in Synapse, you can now use it for, you know, if you want to load it into a dedicated pool, you have the MPP option. You know, that's our full MPP system. If you put it in a storage account, now you can use the serverless pools on top of it. You can use our Spark pools on top of it. You can use. You said you're already using ADF, so you'll be very comfortable with the Synapse pipelines and data flows. So you should start seeing incremental value. It's just a matter of planning what do we want to move first, and then, you know, okay, how can we incrementally build? But as soon as you start landing data in there, you're going to be able to start using these new features and that functionality.
Power BI is well integrated.
Yeah, Power BI is tightly integrated right in the environment. Purview, if you saw the keynote, Evangeline was searching. That search, yes, it was a recorded video, but I did it real. It wasn't images. It was real. The search is integrated right into the Purview environment, or right into the Synapse environment. So it's all tightly integrated.
Right, and so Synapse sits on top of ADF, so I won't need to rebuild pipelines that I've already built in ADF to get the benefit from Synapse.
There might be some minor differences when you transfer them over. Like there are some connectors that are available in ADF that aren't in Synapse. You'll have to watch for that, but the core concept is going to be the same for you.
The better surge. Better surge right there. Vintage surge. Vintage surge.
So you started mentioning about the integrated benefits for Power BI. Once data starts being moved into Synapse and facilitated through there, it should be much easier to run through ADF for provisioning, right? And segmenting that data for data marts in Power BI.
I am not a Power BI guy.
I'm not a
we
guy
get
in
Kai
Cube,
to
so-
come over. we grab Kai Unkrith over there to have him come. I think he's talking to someone already. Yeah, I would talk to Kai Unkrith, who's standing right there by the Power BI booth and is ignoring us. He would be a good person to ask about that because he's been in the analysis service space and moved into Power BI for as long as I've known him, which has been 12 years.
Okay.
Can you use that microphone?
Is there a plan to move those or add those connectors that are in ADF and not Synapse yet? Is there a plan to have all those connectors? Are we ever going to just go pure Synapse?
That I can't answer.
They're all there. The connectors.
According to Catherine, they're all there. But
There are very few differences between.
Yeah.
Can you?
Hi, I love Azure Data Factory and Synapse on the pipeline side. There are very few differences between Azure Data Factory and Synapse pipelines right now. So for linked services, it's exactly the same. The one major difference that you have is that you don't have global parameters in Synapse yet, which is well, but I'm guessing that I'll have to talk to some of the more data integration side of things.
Yeah.
Migrating our SSIS stuff to ADF, but if we're just going to then we might as well go to SSIS directly to.
Yeah, I'm just going to repeat that for everyone else. So the question is, if you are on SSIS now, you don't have to go to ADF. You can go directly to Synapse and get all the other benefits of that with everything else that is in the workspace. I'm sorry I took over.
No, thank you. We'll sit out here. You can come on.
I love your knowledge of this space.
Yes.
She was planted in this crowd on purpose.
Yes.
What else do you guys have?
There it goes. Hopefully it's clear. So if my understanding is right, when I'm working with Synapse and I have to do something within the notebook, I need to spin up a Spark cluster, but the thing is it ends up having to stay within, something like Databricks having to stay within Synapse, for lack of better words. I'd have to go ahead, shut down. I couldn't really leave. One, as I see the face, I don't know how to ask the question about what would happen, say, if I was running a notebook in Synapse. Okay. So I'm struggling to work this right now.
So are you trying to connect to data sources outside of Synapse?
Yeah, say if I'm doing that, but it's within a notebook, but then I have to spin up a cluster. But the cluster itself, I'd have to say I couldn't actually leave Synapse and have the cluster running. If my understanding is right, if it's not, I just...
So yeah, if your compute cluster is going to live in the Synapse environment, but yeah, you can reach out to, if you've got drivers and network connectivity, you can reach out to data sources outside of Synapse. You can reach out to SQL Server, you can reach out to Cosmos DB. Yeah, you can reach out, you can use...
The reach out is still possible.
Yeah, it's running Apache Spark.
Right.
So yeah, anything you can do in Apache Spark, as long as you've got the network connectivity set up, that's the thing, So if you're in a segregated network where you don't have the outbound connectivity, then but you'd have that problem with Databricks too. Yeah, if you can reach out to it through that network and you've got the drivers in your Spark pool,
Okay.
you're going to be able to go out and get that data.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wasn't sure how to word that. But that helps. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, one last thing. EAGLES Eagles.
I'm a Packers fan. I don't have a horse in this race anymore.
We can really get into a physical altercation here. I think this could be bad. You can't go anywhere with these Eagle people.
So, judgment free zone. You mentioned earlier CDC and Synapse Link don't go together. If we have an existing process set up around CDC for triggering things, is there a pathway to get that same functionality and still use Synapse Link?
I'd like to understand your situation more, so I'd like to. I'm gonna push this one off. You can talk to me afterward. I want to truly understand what you're trying to trigger in that, and I don't think we have kind of the bandwidth to do it here. But I'm going to be around all afternoon. Now we're going to get stumped.
Are you going to ask a Synapse question?
I have a question for Tyler, actually.
Love it. Love it. Thank you.
For those who are here right now who are not familiar with the Synapse Influencers program, explain the benefits of that and why they should sign up.
I knew I liked her.
Yes, like I said earlier, we have 800 plus members. We had a very small goal to begin with for 10 members in the first week, and we blew it out of the water with 400, which is crazy. Lots of appetite for just connecting in this community. So you go to aka.ms/Synapse Influencers to sign up. It's free. You get a badge to put on your profile. It says Twitter, but you can use other social platforms to sign up to. Just put it in the social field. And then you'll get invited. You follow us on Twitter, @Synapse, and you'll get invited to the Ask the Expert sessions like this. We usually do a webinar. They are very small, intimate affairs. You can try to stump our experts that we bring in. And we've done them on data integration, security. We did one on Custo. We did one on, I think, Synapse Link already, way back. And then more to come. So very exciting. And also, we send out swag a lot. And this is the last of the 2022 swag, so I get to go work on 2023 swag after this. So there'll be another collectible pair of socks. Or something like that. So if you have any questions about it, ask me. It's super easy to join, like I said, aka.ms/Synapse Influencers.
So what you're saying is that for the low cost of retweeting and sharing on LinkedIn, you get free swag and you get access to the product teams? Sign up.
Okay. That's a good way of saying it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so.
Anything else?
Crazy question. Since Synapse has almost all of the connectors that ADF has, is Microsoft moving more towards Synapse? Are they going to leave ADF, behind?
I see a microphone coming my way on this one.
I can't imagine that's the case.
I don't have an official story on that, but Synapse is a beautiful environment for us. I mean, I remember when I first heard about it and heard about the integration with bringing it all together into one user interface and all of that. And, I love the vision. I love where we've taken it. And ADF, there are still people using ADF. If you don't need the other side of it, ADF is still there for you. It's still, we haven't announced a deprecation or anything on it. So what the future holds, I'm not sure, but we still have them both. Neither has had any deprecation announcements or anything like that.
There's no place. Sorry, can we?
Yeah. So the question I think was, we're just getting started. Should we go with Synapse? Should we go with the ADF? If you're just getting started, I see no reason not to start in Synapse unless there's some very specific thing that isn't there. Start in Synapse because now you've got everything else. You know, you can use our Spark pools. You can still use Databricks, but you can use our Spark pools now too. And if you're just getting started, start in Synapse.
This is the only time I get to contradict anything. ADF v1 is actually
V1?
You know, he was just waiting to contradict us on one of these.
I forgot about V1. I have not, I haven't thought, now I'm going to have nightmares about using V1. Sorry, no.
We'll take any question.
She's going to contradict the engineers next.
I don't work for Microsoft, so I can have other opinions.
Cool. Well, Bob and Chuck will still be here. I think Chuck was going to follow up on your question.
Yep.
But thank you everyone for showing up, and have a great rest of your summit. And I'm going to leave these up there. If you didn't get one, you need more of them, you want to bring one home to your kid, talk to the front desk.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.